If you've been managing type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, here's an uncomfortable truth. Something as simple as the fruit sitting on your kitchen counter right now could be quietly helping you, or quietly working against you, and most people never find out which one until their next lab results come back. There is one fruit that millions of people with diabetes have been told to avoid completely, and it turns out that advice may be more wrong than right. And there's another fruit, one most people barely think about, that new nutrition research suggests may actually be one of the smartest choices you can make for your blood sugar. But here's the part that surprises almost everyone. Even when people choose a genuinely healthy fruit, the way they eat it, the time of day, what they pair it with, can quietly work against them without them ever realizing it. Today we're going to walk through the 3 best fruits for people managing type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, or insulin resistance, and I'm going to show you exactly how to eat them so they work with your body instead of against it. Stay with me until the end, because the fruit at number 1 might completely change the way you think about dessert, and I'll also tell you about a simple mistake that undoes the benefit of all 3 fruits if you're not careful. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. This is Prime Health Insight, and every week we take the latest nutrition and health research and turn it into simple, practical advice you can actually use in everyday life. No jargon, no scare tactics, just real information explained the way a friend would explain it to you over coffee. If that sounds like your kind of channel, consider subscribing because we've got more videos like this one coming every week. Now let's talk about why fruit has such a confusing reputation in the diabetes world in the first place. For years, a lot of people were told that fruit is basically sugar in disguise, and that anyone watching their blood sugar should treat it almost like candy. That advice isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't right either, and it leaves out something really important. Yes, fruit contains natural sugar, but whole fruit also contains fiber, water, and a long list of plant compounds that change the way that sugar behaves once it enters your body. Think of fiber as a kind of traffic control system. Without it, sugar rushes into your bloodstream all at once, like cars flooding onto a highway with no on-ramp metering. With fiber, that sugar gets released slowly, gradually, giving your body time to respond instead of getting overwhelmed. That single difference is a huge part of why some fruits are genuinely helpful for blood sugar, while others, especially fruit juice or dried fruit, can cause a much sharper spike. There's a retired school teacher I want you to imagine. We'll call her Linda, because her situation is one that a lot of viewers watching this will recognize in themselves. Linda was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in her early 60s, and like a lot of people, her first instinct was to cut fruit out of her diet almost entirely. She loved apples, she loved berries in the summer, but she'd heard so many mixed messages that she just played it safe and avoided fruit altogether, even though it meant giving up one of the simple pleasures she looked forward to every day. A few years later, after talking with her doctor and a dietitian, she learned that the real issue wasn't fruit itself. It was the type of fruit, the portion, and what she was eating it with. This is a composite example, not a real patient case, but it reflects a pattern that shows up again and again in conversations about diabetes and diet, that fear ends up taking more away from people than the disease itself sometimes does. Once Linda understood which fruits worked in her favor and how to pair them properly, fruit went from being something she feared to something she actually looked forward to again. That's the shift we want for you too, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which fruits deserve a place back on your plate. So let's get into it. We're counting down from number 3 to number 1, and I want you to pay close attention to the details for each fruit, because the small stuff, the timing, the portion, the pairing, matters just as much as which fruit you choose. Number 3 on our list is the apple, and specifically, apples eaten with the skin on. Now, apples don't always get the credit they deserve in the diabetes conversation, because people assume anything that's sweet must be risky. But apples have something working in their favor that a lot of sweeter tasting fruits don't have in the same amount, and that's a specific type of soluble fiber called pectin. Pectin forms a kind of gel-like substance in your digestive tract, and that gel physically slows down how quickly the sugar from the apple gets absorbed into your bloodstream. In simple terms, it puts a speed bump between the sugar and your blood, so instead of a spike, you get a gentler, more gradual rise. There was a small study that looked at what happens when people with impaired glucose tolerance ate an apple before a meal of white rice, which on its own tends to raise blood sugar fairly quickly. The people who had the apple first saw a slower rise in their blood sugar after the meal compared to when they ate the rice alone. It's one study, and it's a modest one, so I don't want to oversell it, but it lines up with what we understand about how fiber works, and it's a great real-world illustration of a bigger point. What you eat before or alongside a higher-carb food can change how your body handles that food. And here's the mistake that surprised me most when I first started digging into this topic, the kind of mistake that quietly cancels out everything good about eating an apple in the first place. Almost everyone makes it, and it's such a simple one. They peel them. I understand the instinct. The skin can feel a little tough, especially for people with dental issues, but the skin is where a huge portion of the fiber lives, along with a plant compound called quercetin, which researchers have studied for its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. When you peel the apple, you're removing a big part of what makes it useful for blood sugar in the first place, and you're left with more concentrated sugar and less of the fiber that slows it down. If chewing the skin is uncomfortable, thin slices work well, or lightly baking the apple with the skin on, just without added sugar or syrup, is another option. Portion matters here too. A medium apple, roughly the size of a tennis ball, is generally a reasonable serving. And timing-wise, apples tend to work best either as part of a meal or paired with a source of protein or healthy fat. Think a small handful of almonds or a spoonful of natural peanut butter with no added sugar. That pairing does the same job the fiber does, just from a different angle. It slows gastric emptying, meaning your stomach releases its contents more slowly into your small intestine, which again means a slower, steadier rise in blood sugar rather than a spike. When you're shopping, fresh, whole apples are the way to go, and there's genuinely no need to spend extra on organic unless that's a personal preference of yours. The blood sugar benefits come from the fiber and the fruit's structure, not from whether it was grown organically. Store them in the refrigerator crisper drawer. They'll stay fresh for weeks that way, which makes them one of the easiest fruits to always have on hand, almost like keeping a healthy snack on autopilot. No planning required. And one small thing to watch out for: apple juice and applesauce, especially the sweetened kind, lose almost all of the blood sugar benefits we just talked about. Think of it this way. Juicing an apple is a little like removing the brakes from a car and keeping only the engine, all of that fast-moving sugar, with none of the fiber there to slow it down. Without the skin and without the fiber structure of the whole fruit, you're mostly left with fast-absorbing sugar, so if you're going to enjoy apples, the whole fruit is really the way to get the benefit. Now, before we move to number 2, I want you to hold on to something. If a fruit this simple, this common, this available at literally every grocery store in America can make a measurable difference just by keeping the skin on and pairing it smartly, imagine what's possible with a fruit that's even more concentrated in the compounds that help regulate blood sugar. Number 2 is a fruit that most people only think of as a summer treat, but researchers have been paying very close attention to it for a completely different reason. And once you hear it, you probably won't look at a bowl of it the same way again. Number 2 on our list is the cherry, and I want to be specific here. We're talking about tart cherries and sweet cherries both. Fresh or frozen, not the maraschino cherries soaked in syrup that show up on desserts. Cherries have quietly become one of the more interesting fruits in blood sugar research, and there are a couple of reasons why. First, cherries have a relatively low glycemic index compared to a lot of other fruits, meaning they cause a slower, gentler rise in blood sugar per gram of carbohydrate. Second, cherries, especially tart cherries, are unusually rich in a group of antioxidant compounds called anthocyanins, which give them their deep red color. Anthocyanins have been studied for their role in reducing inflammation in the body, and chronic low-grade inflammation is something researchers increasingly connect to insulin resistance, which is the underlying issue in most cases of type 2 diabetes. Here's a story that illustrates why this matters, and again, this is a composite, illustrative example rather than a documented case. Picture a long-haul truck driver, we'll call him Ray, who spent decades eating on the road. Gas station snacks, fast food, whatever was quick and available at 3 in the morning at a truck stop. When Ray was diagnosed with prediabetes in his 50s, it scared him more than he let on, mostly because he'd watched his own father's health decline over the years and didn't want his kids watching him go through the same thing. His doctor didn't tell him to give up all the foods he loved. Instead, she encouraged small, sustainable swaps. One of the easiest ones for Ray was keeping a bag of frozen cherries in his truck's small cooler instead of the candy and soda he used to grab. Frozen cherries thaw quickly, they're naturally sweet enough to satisfy a craving. And unlike candy, they come with fiber and antioxidants instead of just straight sugar. That kind of small, repeatable swap is often more powerful over time than a single dramatic change that's hard to stick with, and it's a big part of why cherries earned their spot on this list. But the fiber and the swap value are honestly just the beginning of what makes them useful. Now, let's talk about the science a little more carefully, because I promised you accuracy over hype. The research on tart cherry juice and inflammation markers, and on cherries and metabolic health more broadly, is genuinely promising, but it's still an area of ongoing study, and results vary depending on the type of cherry, the amount consumed, and the population being studied. I'm not going to tell you that cherries are a miracle food, because no single food is, and anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something. What I can tell you, based on the current body of evidence, is that cherries fit well within a diabetes-friendly eating pattern because of their combination of low glycemic index, meaningful fiber content, and antioxidant profile. In terms of portion, about 1 cup of fresh cherries, which is roughly 10 to 12 cherries, is a reasonable serving. If you're using frozen cherries, the same portion applies, and frozen cherries are actually a great budget-friendly option because they're picked and frozen at peak ripeness, which locks in nutrients, and they're available year-round. Unlike fresh cherries, which have a fairly short growing season, here today, gone in about 8 weeks. One thing to watch out for is dried cherries, similar to what we talked about with apples. Drying concentrates the sugar significantly while the portion size shrinks, almost like reducing a pot of soup down to a thick sauce, all the same sugar, packed into a fraction of the space. So a small handful of dried cherries can contain as much sugar as a much larger serving of fresh ones, and it's easy to eat far more than you realize. If you want to get the most out of cherries, try pairing them with a source of protein like plain Greek yogurt, which has the added benefit of being relatively low in carbohydrates itself, or a small serving of cottage cheese. The combination gives you the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant benefits of the cherries, while keeping the overall meal balanced in a way that supports steadier blood sugar. As for timing, cherries work well as an afternoon snack when energy and blood sugar often naturally dip, or as a light dessert after dinner instead of something like ice cream or cake. One more practical note, tart cherry juice concentrate has become popular as a supplement, often marketed for sleep or joint health as well as inflammation. If you're considering that route, that's a conversation to have with your doctor first, because concentrated juice, even without added sugar, delivers a much more concentrated dose of natural sugar than eating the whole fruit, and it lacks the fiber that would normally help buffer that. Whole or frozen cherries are almost always the better choice over juice or concentrate if blood sugar is your main concern. So that's cherries, low glycemic index, rich in anthocyanins, genuinely useful when eaten whole and paired thoughtfully. But now we're getting to number 1, and this is the fruit that gram for gram might offer the best overall combination of high fiber, low sugar impact, and antioxidant density of any fruit commonly available in the United States. If you've been wondering this whole video which fruit was going to top the list, here it is. Number 1 is the berry family, and I mean this broadly. Blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries all deserve a place here. Though if I had to single one out for the combination of the lowest sugar and highest fiber, blackberries and raspberries usually come out slightly ahead. Here's why berries are in the top spot. A single cup of raspberries contains around 8 grams of fiber, which is close to a third of a typical daily fiber recommendation, packed into a food that has a relatively small amount of digestible sugar per serving compared to almost any other fruit you'll find in a grocery store. Blackberries are similar, with roughly 7 to 8 grams of fiber and just under 14 grams of total carbohydrate per cup, which, once you subtract the fiber, leaves a pretty small amount of sugar that actually needs to be processed by your body. This is where I want to slow down and really explain the science simply, because this is the heart of why berries work so well. When nutrition researchers talk about a food's effect on blood sugar, they often use something called the glycemic load, which factors in both how quickly a food raises blood sugar and how much carbohydrate is actually in a typical serving. Think of it like the difference between a small splash and a full bucket of water hitting a drain. Glycemic index tells you how fast the water is moving, but glycemic load tells you how much water is actually coming, and both matter. Berries score low on this measure for two reasons working together. They don't spike blood sugar quickly to begin with, and the portion you'd realistically eat doesn't contain that much digestible carbohydrate in the first place, a small splash moving slowly. Compare that to something like a large ripe banana or a cup of grapes, which contain more concentrated, fast-absorbing sugar with comparatively less fiber to slow things down, closer to a bucket poured all at once. Both bananas and grapes can still fit into a balanced diet, but berries simply do more work per bite in terms of supporting stable blood sugar. Let me tell you about someone who represents a lot of people watching this video right now. Picture a retired Army veteran, we'll call him Frank, who came home from active duty, spent decades in a desk job, and like a lot of us, watched his weight and his blood sugar creep up gradually over the years without really noticing until a routine checkup flagged it. What stuck with Frank wasn't the number on the lab report, it was thinking about his grandkids and wanting the energy to actually keep up with them at the park instead of watching from a bench. Frank's doctor told him he was pre-diabetic and encouraged him to look at his overall eating pattern rather than trying to overhaul everything overnight. Frank started small. Instead of his usual bowl of sugary cereal in the morning, he started having a small bowl of plain Greek yogurt topped with a handful of frozen blueberries and a sprinkle of chopped walnuts. That's it. That was the whole change to start. Again, this is a hypothetical, illustrative example, not a documented medical case, but it represents the kind of realistic, sustainable adjustment that dietitians commonly recommend, small swaps rather than dramatic restriction. And here's the part that made the biggest difference for Frank. It wasn't just what he added, it was the order he ate it in. Now here's something that surprised a lot of people when it started getting attention in nutrition circles, and it has to do with meal sequencing, which is just a fancy way of describing the order you eat things in during a meal. Some research has suggested that eating fiber-rich foods, like berries or vegetables, before you eat carbohydrate-heavy or sugary foods in the same meal can help blunt the blood sugar spike that follows. The theory is that the fiber forms a kind of protective layer in your digestive tract that slows the absorption of the sugars that come afterward. So, if you're going to have a slice of whole grain toast with your berries in the morning, eating the berries first, or at least alongside rather than after, may work slightly in your favor. It's a small tweak, but small tweaks, done consistently, add up. Let's talk portions and practical shopping advice, because this is where a lot of good intentions fall apart. A reasonable serving of berries is about 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup, depending on the type. Frozen berries are every bit as nutritious as fresh, in some cases even more so, because they're frozen at peak ripeness rather than being picked early to survive shipping, and they're almost always more affordable, especially outside of summer months. If you're on a budget, buying berries frozen in bulk bags is one of the smartest moves you can make. It's basically stockpiling a low-cost, blood sugar-friendly snack that never goes bad in your freezer. They keep for months, and you can pull out just what you need. When buying fresh, look for berries that are firm, deeply colored, and free of any mold, which can spread quickly in a container, so check the bottom of the container, not just the top layer. One mistake people make with berries, especially strawberries, is assuming that because they're fruit, more is always better. Even a low glycemic fruit can raise your blood sugar meaningfully if the portion is large enough, so this isn't a food you need to fear, but it is one where portion awareness still matters. Pairing berries with a protein source, like cottage cheese, a boiled egg, or a small serving of nuts, is one of the easiest ways to round out the meal and keep things steady. And as far as timing goes, berries work beautifully at almost any point in the day. Breakfast, as a mid-afternoon snack, or as a naturally sweet way to end dinner, instead of reaching for something processed. So there you have it. Apples with the skin on for their pectin and slow-release fiber, cherries for their low glycemic index and antioxidant-rich anthocyanins, and berries, sitting at number 1, for their exceptional combination of high fiber and comparatively low sugar impact. 3 different fruits, 3 different strengths, but all 3 share the same underlying pattern: whole, unprocessed, high in fiber, and best enjoyed alongside a source of protein or healthy fat, rather than on their own on an empty stomach. Let's talk for a moment about a few mistakes that show up again and again across all three of these fruits, because avoiding them might matter just as much as which fruit you pick in the first place. The first mistake is eating fruit completely on its own, on an empty stomach, especially first thing in the morning. Fruit by itself, without any protein or fat alongside it, tends to move through your digestive system faster, which can mean a quicker rise in blood sugar, even with a lower glycemic fruit like berries or cherries. It's not that eating fruit alone is dangerous. It's just that a small pairing, a few almonds, a spoonful of nut butter, a boiled egg, tends to smooth things out considerably. The second mistake is portion drift, which is something almost all of us do without realizing it. A recommended serving of berries might be around 3/4 of a cup, but when you're snacking straight from a bag, it's incredibly easy to eat 2 or 3 times that without ever noticing. The fix isn't complicated. It's just portioning fruit into small containers or bowls ahead of time, rather than eating directly from a large bag or bulk container, so you have a visual sense of how much you're actually consuming. The third mistake, and this one catches a lot of people off guard, is assuming that anything labeled as fruit is automatically a good choice. Fruit snacks, fruit-flavored yogurts, fruit bars, and fruit juices often contain little actual fruit and a lot of added sugar, sometimes more added sugar per serving than a piece of candy. Reading the ingredient label matters here. If sugar, corn syrup, or fruit juice concentrate appears near the top of the ingredient list, that product is behaving a lot more like candy than like the whole fruit itself, regardless of what the front of the package claims. And the fourth mistake is treating all fruit the same, without any awareness of glycemic index or fiber content. This is really the whole point of this video. A cup of watermelon and a cup of blackberries can look similar sitting side by side, but they behave very differently once they're in your body. That doesn't mean watermelon or other higher glycemic fruits are off limits forever. Moderation and pairing still apply, but understanding these differences gives you the power to make informed choices instead of guessing, or worse, avoiding fruit altogether out of fear. I do want to pause here and be really clear about something, because this matters more than almost anything else in this video. None of these fruits, or any food for that matter, are a substitute for the guidance of your doctor or a registered dietitian, and nothing here should be treated as medical advice or a reason to change or stop any medication you've been prescribed. Diabetes management is deeply individual. What works well for one person's blood sugar might affect someone else differently depending on their medications, their overall health, and a whole range of personal factors. If you're thinking about making changes to how much fruit you eat, especially if you're on insulin or medications that affect blood sugar, please talk it over with your healthcare provider first. This video is meant to give you accurate, practical information to bring into that conversation, not to replace it. I also want to say something about the bigger picture here, because fruit is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Managing blood sugar well over the long run usually comes down to a combination of things: regular movement, even something as simple as a daily walk, adequate sleep, stress management, and an overall eating pattern that emphasizes whole foods, lean proteins, healthy fats, and plenty of non-starchy vegetables, alongside smart fruit choices like the ones we've talked about today. No single fruit is going to undo years of other habits, and no single fruit is going to hurt you if the rest of your diet is generally sound. The goal isn't perfection, it's consistency, and it's making choices that you can actually sustain for years, not just for a few weeks. If you want a simple reference for everything we covered today, the 3 fruits, the portions, and the best pairings, drop the word guide in the comments below, and I'll make sure you get pointed to a printable version you can keep on your fridge. It's a small thing, but a lot of viewers have told us it makes these tips much easier to actually stick with, day to day. I'd love to hear from you on this one. Which of these 3 fruits do you already enjoy the most? And is there a healthy habit, big or small, that's genuinely helped you manage your blood sugar over time? Drop a comment below and let us know. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the best tips on this channel have come directly from viewers sharing what's worked for them in real life. And if you know someone in your life who's living with diabetes or prediabetes, a parent, a spouse, a friend, maybe even someone who's been feeling overwhelmed or confused about what they're allowed to eat anymore, consider sending this video their way. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone isn't a lecture. It's just handing them clear, practical information that makes their next grocery trip a little easier. Before you go, if this video helped clear up some of the confusion around fruit and blood sugar, give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are asking the exact same questions you probably had before you clicked play today. And if you're wondering what to do about the other side of this conversation, the carbs that aren't fruit, the breads, the rice, the pasta, we've got a video breaking down exactly that. Which one you should watch right after this one if you want the fuller picture of how to eat for steady blood sugar. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got more videos coming that break down real nutrition research into simple, everyday advice. No scare tactics, no miracle cures, just honest information you can actually use. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay curious about what you're putting on your plate, and remember that small, steady choices made consistently over time are what actually add up to real, lasting change. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.